idea is, hopefully we can all see the screen there, the idea is that we're going to be going through, in this particular one, the modern history one, we're going to focus on the kings and queens of Britain. What we're going to do, or at least the plan is, I'm going to have 2 different kings and queens each week, and we can kind of, if you're ready to do some drawing and writing and stuff, we can build up a bit of a project, a timeline of all the kings and queens of England, starting off in 1066. We're not going to go all the way back to the beginning, and ending up with Queen Elizabeth II. Here she is in her beautiful pink hat. So there'll be 2 each time. I'll give you a suggestion of things that you can do, but you might want to sit there whilst I'm talking about all this stuff and draw some pictures, write down some information, whatever. I suggest taking a piece of paper for each king and queen, so you've got a whole load by the end. Or you might just want to sit back and listen and then do some drawing and stuff afterwards, use your own time to make your things look cool and put all your facts and figures in there. Now, if you do have any questions at any point, please put them in the chat. Now, I know lots of people are in the chat, so I've got it in front of me. I can see it going through. Oh, no. But if you do have a question, I'll try and answer it. If lots of people are asking questions at the same time, I might miss things. Now, if you haven't used Zoom before, you'll notice that on your chat box, if you're using your chat box, if you want to say things to each other, then you can go to the bottom there where it says to everyone. You can change that to a particular person, and you can send them a private message. So if you do want to just talk to someone else, that's fine without everyone seeing what you're saying. That works. Likewise, if you want to say something just to me and not to each other, then just make sure that you go down there, instead of to everyone, make sure it says to Jake Richards. And it will just show up on my computer, and no one else will see your question. So if you've got a question but you feel embarrassed about asking it, you can use that. We're going to start today with not the first king of England. The first king of England is Alfred the Great. Now, he was pretty great, and his name was Alfred, but he's the start of a long line of Anglo Saxon kings. Now, the Anglo Saxons, they're a group of people who really aren't native to Britain. Not many people are. They came over here after the Romans left. And we had a right merry old time for about, 1,000 years from the invasion of the Romans to 1066. We've got a lot of different kings coming along. England is divided into different parts. So this is Great Britain and Ireland today. We've got England, we've got Wales, we've got Scotland, we've got Northern Ireland, and we've got Ireland itself. When we're talking about the first kings of England that we're talking about today, we're looking at England that looks roughly like this. Wales is certainly not part of England at this time in history, 1066. They're far too rebellious and uncouth. The Welsh, they're trying to invade England a lot of the time, so we'll keep them there. Scotland, likewise, they're not so down with the English. They're doing their own thing. And over in Ireland, there are lots and lots of kings and chiefs doing their thing too. So I decided we'd start in 1066 because that's the first time that we can find the bloodline of Queen Elizabeth. So if we're trying to work out where Queen Elizabeth comes from, we can need to look back in history at her great times many grandfathers and grandmothers to get where she is. So, as I say, as we're going through, if you want to draw some things, write some things, build up a collection of kings and queens, that'd be amazing. Each king and queen that we're going to do, I'll talk about them as a person, but I'll also talk about some important things that were going on in the country at that time. So that way we'll get a lot of British history and a bit of world history too, as things sort of start colliding, especially towards the later kings and queens. But it'll be a good overview of the history of these islands, at least. If you do come up with some very cool work, which I'm sure a lot of you will do, please do send it to me via email and I can have a look. I might not be able to get back to everyone. It depends how many people are sending me work, but it would be great to see it. So, let's move over here to our first king. I'll put my email address up and stuff at the end. Whoa, people still coming in? Hello, hello. Okay, so our first king that we're going to look at is Harald Godwinson. And although I said that we are going to look at the line of kings that leads to Queen Elizabeth, poor Harold, he's the only king that we're going to look at who doesn't lead to the line of Queen Elizabeth. He's a bit of an outsider. He's a king of England, and what I'll do for each king is I'll show you their name, so Harald Godwinson here, and I'll show you the dates that he was king for when he started being king and when he ended being king. Poor old Harald Godwinson only has one date, which means the year he started to be king was also the year that he stopped being king. So, like I said, this guy, I guess, cool, Lucy. Now, yes, some of you will have done some of this in school already. Some of you will have done this with me already. But the idea is to have such a broad scope that there will be parts that you've done, there will be parts that you haven't. I know, especially with the kings and queens, that a lot of you will have watched horrible histories, and so you'll know some facts about a lot of these kings and queens anyway, which is fine. But hopefully I'll give you some new interesting bits to think about, or just refresh your memory, so that's cool. Yes, and if you are someone who can recite the entire Kings and Queens song from Horrible Histories, fair play to you. That's good. Okay. So, this guy, it's 1066, it's January, it's very cold, and we did have an old king called Edward the Confessor. Edward the Confessor, very good at having a white beard, very good at confessing, a very religious king. His brother-in-law is Harald Godwinson. Edward the Confessor, though, he doesn't have. Oh, we'll come to the Wittengemut in a minute. England has a very old king, and that old king, Edward the Confessor, is about to die. Now, he's got a problem. He's had no children. So when he dies, the throne of England is kind of wide open. No one's quite sure who's going to take over. And to be honest, the old king, Edward the Confessor, he hasn't made it easy. He seems to have promised the crown to at least 3 people in one way or the other. Now, one of those people is the king of Norway, Harald Hardrada. Now, this gets a bit strange, but before Edward the Confessor, the dead king, becomes king, he promises the Vikings, the Norwegians, that they can be king of England after him, because he's taken over, Edward the Confessor has taken over from a line of Viking kings already. That's right, England used to be ruled by the Vikings. And so when he dies, Harald Hardrada from over there in Norway says, well, okay, he's dead. It's time for me to take my throne back. And so he gathers up an army with the help of a man called Tostig. Tostig is the man on the screen's brother, Harald Godwinson. There's another man who decides that he would like to be king, and that's Harald Godwinson. He is the man on the screen. We've got the picture here with a crown on, so that will give us a hint that he does actually become king. And he's Anglo Saxon, he's English, like Edward the Confessor. He's married to Edward the Confessor's sister, so that's a good start in life. He's also probably at that time the richest man in England, so he's got loads of money. For those of you wondering what the words on the screen mean, they're really just there to remind me and the order of things to talk about, and I'll explain each one as we go through. So if there are words on the screen that you don't understand, I will get to them. Good to see you back, Jasper. Okay, so oh, that's good, Alfred. I'm glad you know about this. So Harold has loads of money. He's super rich, and if you're super rich back in Anglo-Saxon times, that means that not only do you have a great big bag of money, but you also get a huge army full of soldiers that you can play around with. And so it looks like Harald Godwinson is probably the most powerful man in England. Now, when kings die, especially if they have no direct heirs, so usually it's their oldest son who becomes king, especially at this time. Daughters aren't really included, I'm afraid, at this period. But when you die, usually your oldest son takes over. For Harold, his for Edward, sorry, he doesn't have any children, so it comes down to a group of old men, the Wittengemot. Well, they're called the Witten, and their meetings are called a Wittengemot or a Wittengemot. A group of old men who sit around and decide who should be king. Now, Harald has got quite a good claim, Harald Godwinson, because he has been promised, just like Harald Hardrada, the king of Norway, he's been promised that he can be the king. According to Harald Godwinson, as the king lay dying, he told Harald, "You can be king after I am dead." Now, unfortunately, not everyone else heard this. Harald heard it, but not necessarily anyone else. So Harald goes to the Wittengemot. Here's an old picture of the old Wittengemot. Here they are with their pointy hats and their long beards. At least there's a picture representing them. We're not entirely sure what the Wittengemot looked like, or anyone else at that time, really. This portrait of Harald here was painted a long time after his death. So how accurate this is, we just don't know. Could have been just someone assuming this is what he looked like, really. The Wittengemot, they come together and they decide that, yes, we will give the throne to the richest man, the most powerful man in England, Harald Godwinson. And they come to this decision very quickly. The day after Edward the Confessor dies, Harald Godwinson is given the crown by the Wittengemot and becomes King of England. Not for long, though. Ooh. Now, oh, I'm sorry, Rebecca, that you can't hear me, although it's pointless me saying that. Let me see if I can help Rebecca out here. I can't. Oh no, there's loads of Rebeccas. I can't even do that way. Oh, now, let me just check. Yeah. So, Harald, he's quite a good king, I imagine. He's quite popular. People seem to like him. He's got links to the old king, which makes him popular. You know, he was not just the old king's brother-in-law, but he also was one of his chief advisors, one of those people who are there to try and help the kingdom flourish, to make money, to be secure, to be safe. So he's probably quite a popular king with the English people. But I did say there were 3 people who had been promised to be king, and one of these lives over the sea in Normandy. We'll see him in a minute. But his name is William, the Duke of Normandy. He was promised to be king by Edward the Confessor, because when Edward the Confessor was in a bit of trouble, some lords started a rebellion against him and started to try and take over his kingdom. This man from Normandy, which is northern France, William, he came over and helped Edward to save the country and to keep it in Edward's hands. And as a reward, Edward the Confessor had said, "Okay, you can be the king when I'm dead." So now, already, Edward has promised 3 different people that they can be the king. Yes, very nearly Hastings times. Oh, I'm glad you figured it out, Rebecca. That's good. That's good. So he's promised Harald Hardrada, the king of the Vikings, the king of Norway. He's promised Harald Godwinson on his deathbed. He's promised William of Normandy too. And what are these 3 men going to do about it? Well, they're going to have a scrap. That's cool. That's cool. Oh, yes, we'll come to Stamford Bridge. Oh, very good, Abigail. So there is a 4th person, though, who believes they should be king as well, who's often forgotten in history, the poor man. His name is Edgar the Theling. Now, he was never promised to be king, but he's probably the one that deserves to be king most, according to the rule book, because the rules say that the oldest living male relative of the king gets to be the next king. So yes, Edward didn't have any children, but he did have a great nephew who was called Edgar the Theling, which means Atheling is the name that we give to someone who gets to be the next king. Yeah, in France they call them the Dauphin or the Dolphin. In Britain, in English history, we call them the Atheling. Now, Edgar, he doesn't get given the crown. The Wittengemut say he can't have the crown, even though he's the closest relative, because he's only a teenager. And they decide, we're not going to let a teenager be king. That would probably be a bad idea, which might be sensible, but I don't know. Maybe they should have just given it to him, and maybe the world would have been a very different place. So, Harald is known for a few things within his reign. Thank you, Lucy. That's useful. Hang on. More people joining. Hello, good morning. So, Harald, he's known for being rich. He's known for being the king. He's known for being favoured by the Witten during their Wittengemut. He's also famous for being pretty good in battle. Yeah. Now, even before he became king, Harald is good at fighting. He's good at leading men, his army. He's good at fighting the Welsh. Ooh. He's good at fighting rebels. Double ooh. And so he's got experience. You know, he's a good soldier. And he's going to prove what a good soldier he is later on in the year 1066. He starts off. He knows that two other people, these two men, the Viking Harald Hardrada and the Norman William, he knows they're going to come for him. He knows they're going to attack. Especially, he knows that Harald Hardrada is going to attack because his own brother Tostig, the evil Tostig, has gone over the sea, and he's actually told the King of Norway to come and invade and kill his brother. It's all very soap opera-like, all very dramatic. So Harald knows they're coming. He just doesn't quite know who's going to get there first. Is William going to come from the south and invade? Is Harald Hardrada going to come over from Norway, from the east, and invade? And in which order are they going to do this? It's a tricky situation. So he gets his army ready and he waits all summer. But as the summer goes on, it starts getting more and more obvious that no one's coming. And Harald has to send his army home to go and do the harvesting. You can't just have all of the men of the country just waiting around for an attack that's not coming. And so they start to melt away and go off home. And Harald is sort of left, sat all alone. Oh dear. Until late in the year, he gets a message that Harald Hardrada and his evil brother Tostig have come, and he decides he's got to move north. He quickly gathers back his army together. He brings them all together. And he marches up the country. Now, I don't know how far you guys could march in a day. Maybe you could put in the chat box how many miles you think you could march in a day. Yeah. Let's see, let's have some estimates. Now, marching, 10 miles there, RNN? Yeah. So marching is fast walking, really. 26 miles, Carol, that's pretty cool, okay. 200 miles, Abigail, well, that's incredible. We've got 20, we've got 5, okay. Only 2 for Alfred, yeah, you're taking it slow. About 40 for Rebecca, that's cool. Wow, that's a lot of 9s there, Ryan. That's a lot of 7s as well. 200, Mia Mary, that's cool. What we got? 10 from Aria. That's a lot of 9s, Abby Sam. 85, Dan. That's some going. 4, Ollie. I think I'd be more closer to 4. Yeah. Only 1 for Jasper. Oh dear. And Unicoaster's not going anywhere. They're just staying still. Okay, that's a good mix. Now, what Harald manages to do is he manages to get from the south of England up to Yorkshire. That's about 200 miles in but 5 days. To be fair, it's more impressive that his soldiers do that. He's probably riding on a horse, which isn't quite so amazing. But his men, the peasants, or what we call the Fyrd, the people he's brought together to fight, they're just marching on their own little feeties, and they're going north up the country as fast as they can. And they're not just marching as fast as they can. They've got their supplies with them. They've got their weapons with them. They haven't got proper shoes like we have today. Not one of them is wearing a pair of Nike Airs. Most of them are probably just wearing, hard shoes made out of cardboard and wood. And bits of gravel. I don't know what people did back then. But they're doing a good job. They're marching. They must have been very fit. Now, this is a benefit of living in 1066. Most men, well, I think we could say every man in England would have been pretty fit. Yeah, these are people who work all day in the fields. Every day they're farming, they're hoeing, they're ploughing, they're picking things, I don't know, stroking sheep, whatever people do in farms. And so they're going to be pretty big and muscly. So these guys, they managed to walk a long, long way in those 5 days. And when they get to the north, when they get to York, they've got there so fast that Harald Hardrada's army, they've invaded, they've come down the river into Yorkshire, and they're running around the place. They've captured York, and they've filled it full of Viking hats and horns and ale, I don't know, whatever Vikings do, big beards. They're doing that, and they're not expecting Harold Godwinson's army anytime soon. No, Harold Godwinson, what's he going to do? March 200 miles in 5 days? Not likely, but aha, here he is. He's ready to fight. And the poor old Viking guys, they're all sat there. It's early in the morning when Harold Godwinson's army arrives at a place called Stamford Bridge. And they're so unprepared, they're so shocked that they have to run out and they have to fight Harold's army. Most of them not even wearing armor, because they've just woken up. They're still in their pajamas. They've got just enough time to pick up their axes and their spears. But that's about it. Now, let me bring up another picture here. Now, they nearly win it. The Vikings, even though they're caught off guard, the Norwegians, they do a good show. They meet at this place called Stamford Bridge. It's called Stamford Bridge because, well, it's in Stamford and there's a bridge. Here we go. You don't think they had PJs back then? Maybe not. They certainly didn't call them pajamas, did they? That's an Indian word, so yeah. Maybe if they did have PJs, they didn't call them PJs, I reckon. There we go. Now, Stamford Bridge is a place in Yorkshire that has a bridge, and the English, we'll call them English, they're not really English, the Anglo Saxons, Harold Godwinson's guys, they need to get across the river and to get rid of the vicious Vikings. But the Vikings have one star player, a guy who is pretty much unbeatable, and we can just about see him here on this picture. He's a giant of a man. The history books say that he is literally a giant. You know, I'm not sure how big he really was. This is a more realistic picture of him. My picture's going funny. But we've got this one huge guy. He's standing on a bridge. The English are trying to get across, but they cannot. And everyone who tries to get on the bridge, this one giant of a Viking just starts cutting them to pieces. Smack, smack, smack with his axe. No one can get across. It's a bit of a nightmare for the English until they come up with a sneaky plan. How do you stop a Viking? If you cannot attack him from the front, what you need to do is you need to get yourself a little raft. You need to sneak under the bridge with a spear, and you need to stick that spear right up through the little slats in the bridge, right up the bottom of the Viking giant. Oh yeah. So that's what they do. They stick him from below, the giant falls down, and the English, they charge over the bridge, and they start to destroy all of those Viking invaders, clear them out of York. Now, in this battle, yes, there are multiple Rebeccas there. No bombs back then, Riley, or at least not bombs like we'd think of. That is definitely a way of destroying a Viking giant. Would be a bomb, but yeah, I'm afraid Harold Godwinson didn't have much of a bomb selection to choose from. More man with spear, we're thinking here. So, I don't think the original Stamford Bridge is still standing, as far as I know. One of the football teams has their stadium is called Stamford Bridge, isn't it? I don't know if that's connected, or I'm not sure. I don't know much about football really, or stadiums, or bridges. So, The Anglo Saxons, they come across, they wipe out the Vikings, they nearly kill every single one of them. There are certainly not very many left. Of the about 300 ships that invaded England with the Vikings on board, only about 24 of them sailed back home again. So that tells us how many of those Vikings have been killed. Amongst the Viking dead is King Harald Hardrada. He's dead. And the evil brother Tostig, he's killed too. And lots of other Norwegians. The rest of them do get home. Now, Harald Hardrada, the Viking king, he has a son who is fighting alongside him, who is captured. His name is Olaf, a bit like that there snowman thing. Olaf, he is protected by Harald. Harald says, "We will not kill you, Olaf. We will let you go back across the sea to Norway, where you can be king of Norway on one, as long as you agree to one thing, and that's never to come back and attack us again." And Olaf says, "Ha, yeah, okay." And off he goes with his men, and he goes back to Norway, never to bother Harald again. Now, that's not quite the same, I must say, as not bothering England again, because he will. He'll be really annoying for the next 10, 20 years. But as far as Harald's concerned, he never gets attacked again by the Vikings, which is just as well, because between you and me, he doesn't have long to live. So, he's a Viking killer, for sure. Now, I'm sure that some of you will know this story already, but Harald, there he is. He's waiting. He's just beaten the Vikings. He's maybe thinking, we'll have a rest now. We've got all these cool Viking boats that we can have a play on. But he's not allowed to stay still for long, because no sooner has he defeated the Vikings at Stamford Bridge, he gets another message. Somebody's attacked from the south. William the Conqueror, he's on his way with his mighty Norman army. Now, this is where it starts to go wrong for Harald. And this is where we need to remember a simple bit of advice. Listen to your mum. Okay? Because Harald is not going to listen to his mum, and it's going to lead to problems. Ooh, poor Harald. So, Harald, he's feeling very confident. Yeah, now, he always knew there were two armies that were going to come and attack him. He knew the Vikings were going to come, and he knew the Normans were going to come. And if you'd asked him which of those armies is scarier, he would have said, obviously the Vikings, because everyone knows that Vikings are scary. Everyone knows that people from Normandy are just great big wusses. They're too busy drinking wine and doing funky dances. They're not scary at all. And so at first, Harold's feeling pretty confident. He's just defeated the biggest army he could, All that's left is to go and finish off those Norman guys. Normandy, if I haven't said already, is in northern France. They speak French. Although the Normans are related to the Vikings, because the Normans are just Vikings that went to France and settled down a few generations before and then started speaking French. Ooh la la. So, Harold's feeling confident. He says, right, plan number one worked really well against them Viking guys. We marched really fast, we surprised them, we attacked them, we defeated them, I'm the king. Brilliant. Kind of makes sense. So he reckons, let's do that again. Let's just march really fast down the country, all the way down to Kent, where we will attack William by surprise, and we will have another fantastic victory. Now, yeah, we'll come to the dead bit in a minute. Yeah. I don't know what that says. So, it's at this point, as he starts to march down the country as fast as he can, with his poor worn-out soldiers, who have already marched north for 5 days, then fought a massive battle. One of them had to poke a giant up the bottom from under a bridge. And as they're marching back down, he gets a letter from his mum. His mum says, come on, Harald, you're not going to be fit and strong enough to go and defeat those there Normans. Come to London, chill out for a bit. What we can do is we can stay in London. We've got big walls, we'll be nice and safe, We've got a whole load of angry Londoners around us. William will never be able to kill you here. No, we'll just stay safe in London, and we'll let William come to us. But Harold, he's not thinking this. He does stop off in London for a few days, gets a bit of rest, gets a few extra soldiers, but not for long enough. He then ignores what his mum says, and he starts marching down the country to go and fight William. Now, as he's marching down the country, he's picking up soldiers from here and there. But most of his soldiers are, peasanty guys. They're farmers. I said they're really fit, but they're not trained, most of them. He does have a very core group that we call the Housecarls. These guys are big dudes with armor and shields and axes and helmets. They're good fighters. They're his personal bodyguard. But he hasn't got loads of them. Most of his people are just, your general average Joes or Josephines. Here we go. So, down he goes, ignoring his mum's advice. Now, we'll leave him there for a second. Oh no, he's got... Harald is dead already. There we go. What happens is we'll leave him there for a second, and we'll come and look at William, because this is the man that he's going to fight, and spoiler alert, he is the next king. We can see he lasts slightly longer, because he... hang on. Ooh, no. He manages to... he's going to defeat Harald Godwinson at something called the Battle of Hastings, which I'm sure a lot of you might have heard of before. Now, we clear his funny moustache. He's already got a funny enough moustache. Yes, it is the person who makes the Doomsday Book, Jasper. Yeah, we'll come to that in a minute. That's good. So let's give a little bit of background about William before we come back to how Harald gets killed. Like I said, he's the Duke of Normandy, which means he's in charge of this northern part of France called Normandy. Northern, they're the Northmen, the Normans. They live in the north, basically. Yeah. He speaks French, even though he's got Viking ancestors. He's French. He's a bit of a merciless mercenary. He spends his younger days, and I think maybe one of the best ways to think about William I is maybe he's what we call a psychopath, a completely full of anger, rage. You don't want to get on his bad side. He's a very, very scary person. I think of most of the kings and kings of England, I think William is probably the one that I'd like to meet the least. I don't like him at all. He scares me a little bit, as we'll see. But he spends his young life, before he becomes in charge of Normandy, he spends his life traveling around Europe with a group of knights, men on horseback, who are mercenaries. A mercenary is someone who gets paid to fight and kill people. So he's a soldier for hire, and this will take him all over the place. He will fight all over France. He will fight down into Italy and Sicily. And his knights have a reputation of being completely ruthless and completely scary. If you're in a battle and all of a sudden along comes William and his knights, you're probably going to run away pretty quick, because everyone knows that they're better than you and that they don't ever let people surrender. They just kill you. So they're a scary bunch. You also, the people of Normandy, have learnt not to disrespect William. He doesn't like it when you talk about his mum. Mums are very important in history, as you can imagine. Now, William's mum, unlike his dad, who was the Duke of Normandy, his mum was just a normal peasant woman. She was the daughter of a tanner, someone who makes leather using urine, basically. And so everyone thought that she was a bit rubbish because she wasn't rich enough. But if you said that to William, he would completely go crazy. In fact, at one point, he goes into, this is before he invades England, but he goes into a village in France, and the people there, they're annoyed with him for some reason. And so a lot of the peasants, they hang up bits of leather from their windows to kind of say, ha, your mum was rubbish. Yeah. Now, most people would get upset by that, William did get upset by that, but he also got really, really angry. And he started killing people and torturing people and smashing things over because he's that kind of guy. Do not disrespect his family or he gets angry. Definitely rage mode. So this is the guy who's coming to invade England. Harold's thinking, he's a little bit wary of William because before all this happened, before William invades England, Harold had actually gone to Normandy a few years before and had met William. And William had made Harold promise that William could be the king. It's all getting very complicated, isn't it? So Harald Godwinson, he goes to Normandy, and William says, will you promise that I can be the king? Will you say that I can be king when Edward, the old man with the white beard, when he dies? Can I be the king, please? And Harald Godwinson says, no, I would like to be king. No. And so William, he ties Harold up, he puts a sword to his throat, and he says, what about now? Can I be the king? And of course, Harold promises that he can. So now William is saying that Harold promised him, and Edward promised him. It's his throne. He should have it. So he's pretty angry, and this is the guy, this kind of nutty guy who's coming over to try and invade England. If I had been Harold, I would have listened to my mum and I would have hidden in London. But he doesn't. So William isn't just a bit crazy and a bit scary. William is also really clever. He gets together a great big army, loads of ships. He has more ships than they had in the Spanish Armada, if you know what that is. And the Spanish Armada was supposed to be the biggest fleet to ever invade Britain. It wasn't. This was bigger. William, he manages to, he's not a very rich man, but he tells loads of rich people around the country, he says, look, if you give me ships and you give me soldiers, when I take England, you can have parts of that country for yourself. Yeah. So I will let you own a part of England. And so this means that people are lending him soldiers and boats and money whenever he needs it. He also has the help of the Pope. Now, does anyone know who the Pope is? What is the Pope? You have to put it in the chat box if you've got an idea. Let's see if we've got some ideas about what the Pope is or who the Pope is. Oh, I'm not sure how many ships he had, Alfred. I'm not sure if it was 1,000 ships or... I imagine less, but the numbers with the battles and the soldiers, it's always hard. A church leader, that's good. A religious person, yeah. The head of the Catholic Church. Very good, Max, yeah. That's it, the head of the church. Yeah, a bit like a pastor, I suppose, a pastor plus. So, yeah, well done, guys. That's good. So the Pope is the head of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, at this time, everyone in Western Europe is a Roman Catholic. There are no Protestants. They haven't come around yet. There are a few Jewish people here and there, but they're a very small group. And to be honest, they're not very welcome in a lot of the medieval, pre-medieval kingdoms. So the vast majority of people are Roman Catholics, which means that the vast majority of people do what the Pope says. Now, the name Pope just means daddy. Yeah, he the daddy, because Pope means pape. Yeah, papa, dad. So Daddy Pope, there he is in Rome, and he's telling people, he tells people what to do to get to heaven and, how to avoid hell and all that kind of cool stuff, stuff you need to know on a day-to-day basis, I guess, if you're, Christian. So he's a big deal, and the people listen to him. Now, he gives... a bit like Father Ted, yes, I suppose so. Father Ted is not quite the daddy, but yeah, the Daddy Pope. The Pope helps William out. He says, I think you should be king, and he gifts William with a magical flag. A big flappy flag that will bring the power of God down upon Harold. So it looks like William's definitely got some advantages here. He's got a lot of money, he's got a lot of ships, he's got a lot of soldiers, he's got a magic flag. He's also been to IKEA, because he's very, very clever, is William. Yeah? And it wasn't literally IKEA, but he basically had the same idea as IKEA. William loves castles. Yeah? Castles are his thing. And there are no castles in England. Harold doesn't have any. London has some walls around it, and there are some old Roman forts kicking around, but no proper castles. So William, when he invades England, he comes prepared. He has flat pack, IKEA-style castles in his ships. Basically, all of the walls of the castles ready-made, ready-cut, all of the nails and the weird little Swedish Allen key that you need to put the stuff together. He's got all that stuff all on the ships, so when he gets to England and he lands in a place called Pevensey, he can build a castle straight away. Yeah, he just gets the bit off the ship, gets out the weird upside-down IKEA instructions and just hammers it all together. So he's as ready as a man can be. Yes, thank you. Yeah, if we are going to put stuff in the chat, try and keep it relevant, Kai, please, just so that I can keep up with what's on the screen, because otherwise I miss things. Yeah. So so what we've got is there we are. So he's got his castles, he's got his magic flag, he comes across the sea, he's got a slightly crazy outlook on life. He's coming and he's going to be violent about it. That's for sure. And he gets to England, he builds his castle at Pevensey, and Harald now is coming for him. He's coming down the country. Now, William isn't going to be surprised. He's not like Harald Hardrada, the Viking king. No. He's not surprised at all. As people start coming, as Harald's army comes down the country, he's fully aware. In fact, the two men are actually sending letters to each other, saying things like, "Do we really need to fight?" And William's like, "Yes, we definitely need to fight." And Harald's like, "Oh, could we fight maybe later in the year?" "No," says William. "Let's fight now." And so by the time Harald gets there, William is ready for him. Now, having said this, Harald, let's go back to him, he has an okay situation. He's got to Hastings, or a place called Battle, which is near Hastings, a place that will be called Senlac Hill. He settles down on Senlac Hill with all his men around him. Now, Harald's army is quite straightforward. You're one of two things in Harald's army. You're either a feared, which is the normal guys with their farming tools, no real armor and stuff. And then you've got the housecarls, those guys with their great big shields, armor, proper soldiers. But there's, not so many of those. It's really hard to say how many numbers were in each of these armies. We just don't know. No one was counting, or at least the people that counted give us different numbers. It's hard to keep track of it. The thousands, there's definitely thousands of men on each side, but we're not entirely sure how many thousands. Yeah. So Harald's ready. He takes the hill. He forms what we call a shield wall, which is basically a wall made of shields. Kind of does what it says on the tin there. And they're on the top of a hill with their shields out. And to be honest, they could probably stay there for months if they wanted to. A bit like turtle formation, yeah. The turtle formation that the Romans used was a bit more, a bit more, what's the word? A bit more impressive, maybe, because they would have these great big tower shields, these rectangular shields, the Romans, and they could make a solid turtle formation. Whereas the housecarls and the feared, they've got rounded shields, which means they can make a kind of turtle thing going on, but not quite the same. But yeah, well spotted there. So it's a wall of shields, and they're in a perfect position. They're at the top of a hill, which means that anyone who's trying to shoot at them or charge up the hill is going to be worn out, and their arrows are going to lose power because of gravity working against them. They're also up there with a couple of springs. So they've got a water source, which means they're not going to run out of water anytime soon. They can keep that, if they do have to stay on the hill for a week or so, they're not going to get too thirsty because there's water right there with them. How are they sending letters? So all of these guys, we kind of think about this long time ago in history as being really basic, but it's not really. These are people who are quite sophisticated. They're always sending messages back and forth amongst each other. There are riders on horses who will take messages back and forth. So yeah, we can imagine just riders, people on horses, the fastest horses in the kingdom, being sent to go to each other's camps. So there is lines of communication over. Not quite Twitter, I suppose. Maybe you could get a parrot if they had existed in England, and you could like tell it to say things, but nah, that's as close. An owl, I like it, Lucy. Yeah, okay. Did Starbucks exist? No, Starbucks is pretty new, I'm afraid. Coffee didn't exist yet, to be honest, so Starbucks would have been a bit redundant back in 1066. Maybe if Starbucks had existed, everyone would have just gone and had a coffee instead of hacking each other to death in a Kentish field, but that's history for you. So the battle starts with William's trying to take the hill from Harald. And like I say, Harald could probably sit there all day. William's army is a bit better than Harold's army, maybe. His soldiers are better trained. He hasn't got feared. He also has something that Harald doesn't have. He has cavalry, which are men riding horses. Soldiers riding horses. Now, Harald, his men, his housecarls, will come to battle riding horses, but then they will get off the horses and leave the horses at the back, and then they'll fight on foot. They haven't quite worked out the whole fighting on the back of a horse thing yet. Yeah, they wouldn't have known, Alfred, about gravity. They would have understood that gravity exists because everyone's dropped stuff, but they wouldn't have given it the name gravity, and they wouldn't have understood how it worked for sure. That's Newton who comes up with that stuff. Yeah, good question though. But they definitely would have understood that if you fire an arrow uphill, it's not as effective as if you're firing an arrow downhill, even though they wouldn't have used that word gravity, I guess. You're right, Kai. So the battle goes on throughout the morning. William tries to get up the hill. He tries to break the shield wall. He cannot do it. It goes on and on. A few hours of fighting. People are dying here and there, but there's no massive breakthrough either side. It looks like Harald Godwinson can sit on that hill forever, and William is just going to wear himself out trying to break the people on the hill. Until William comes up with a super plan, or perhaps is just a complete idiot. We're not sure. You can decide for yourself. But this is what happens. There's a great big charge. William leads a charge up towards the shield wall. And as he's leading the charge, as he's going, "Ooh la la, let us fight, boys, come on, yeah, go, go, go." All of a sudden, he falls off his horse. He hits the ground. His crown crumples beneath him. At least in my imagination it does. He's not really wearing a crown, but in my head he's wearing a crown. Yeah, it's a very good accent. I'm pretty much amazing at all voices. Yeah, no, I'm not. So up he goes. He falls off his horse, and everyone starts shouting, "Oh no, the king is dead! Oh no, run away from the horrible English!" And off they go. They run away, and the people on the hill, Harold's men, they start to cheer. "Oh yeah, the king is dead. That bad William is gone." And they give up their shield wall. They start running down the hill towards the French, or the Normans, who are running away, chasing those Normans down. Now it's at this point that William jumps up and he goes, "Ta-da! I am not dead. I am very much alive." And so his entire army turns around, gives a great big cheer, and they charge back at the Anglo Saxons. Now, of course, at this point, the Anglo Saxons have not got their shield wall up. Oh no, they've let the shield wall down because they think they've already won, and William all of a sudden is back on his horse, and the entire Norman army crushes them right through the shield wall that no longer exists. Now, the myth says, or the legend says, I should say, that Harald gets killed in this battle by being shot in the eye with an arrow. I like that story. There's no real evidence of that story. We don't know, to be honest, if he died with an arrow in the eye or not. It's a nice idea, though, that he stood there on the hill shouting, "Shield wall, guys, shield wall, get your shields up." And all of a sudden, out comes a Norman arrow and just shoots him through the eye, and boom, he's dead. But we don't have evidence of that. There is in the Bayer tapestry, which is part of the thing that's behind me up here. There is a picture of Harald, or somebody, I should say, getting shot in the eye. Not necessarily, though, Harald. We don't know. Yeah, it's somebody with an arrow in their eye. It could be Harald. It's kind of assumed to be Harald. But even so, the people who made the Bayeux Tapestry didn't necessarily know how Harald died either. We'll go with the legend, though. He gets shot in the eye. He is dead. William is victorious, but he's not quite king yet. You don't just get to kill the old king and magically become the new king. Oh, no, 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 no. You need to get the Wittengemut on side. Oh, yeah. Even Norman invaders need the old men with the pointy hats, the pointy beards to be on side. Yeah. So, William, we'll come back to him. Goodbye, Harald. Rest in peace. Nice knowing you. Nice moustache. William, he goes on and he's got a decision to make. Does William? He needs to figure out how he's going to be king. And he's got two choices. He can either go and attack London, take London, which is the capital, or at least the most important town at this point. And, through that, he'll have loads and loads of power, and therefore he can then potentially become king. But he's also got another option. He can go to Winchester, which is a town in the south, which has the treasury. That's where all the money in England is kept, alongside other precious things like old Edward the Confessor's wife. She's not his wife anymore because he's dead, but she's still there. So he decides he's going to go to Winchester. He'll take the money. He'll take the old wife. Keep her prisoner in quite nice conditions, we imagine, but still prisoner nonetheless. And then he advances on London. By the time he gets to London, the Witten have realised that anyone who was going to fight back against William is dead. William has the south of England, Kent, that area, so he's already got loads of power. He's already built his castles, or a couple of castles, before he gets there. The towns like cities, I guess, like Canterbury, have already capitulated and given their service to William. And so by the time he gets to London, with all the money and the dead king's wife, the Witten decide, look, we're going to have to make this guy king. Yeah, he's just too powerful to say no to anymore. And so William is crowned as king on Christmas Day, December the 25th, 1066. What a Christmas. Oh, yeah. Which is pretty cool. Now, William isn't particularly well liked, as you can imagine. Can we have some ideas in the chat, please? Why would William not be very well liked by the people in England? I mean, he's quite popular in Normandy at this point, but why would the people of England not be too happy with William from what we've heard so far? Evil. He's rude. He is very rude. I think it's very rude to attack other people's countries and take them over. That's very, yeah. You're right. He's a psychopath. Yes. Because he's killed a lot of them. He has, especially their leaders. He's killed the king. If people came and killed our queen today, I think most people would say that's rather rude. Stop that. Terrible behaviour. Cruel. That's a good word. Yeah. Yes, he literally just killed the king. He's not fat. He will get fat, Ryan, but he's not fat at this point. No, at this point, he's very, very fit. He dies quite a large gentleman, but yeah, not at this point. He invaded and killed everyone. That's it, Jasper. Yeah. He attacks because he's French. Yeah, Kai. There's also that basic sort of sense of racism there. The English people, it's all very well being led by an English king if you're English, but what is it like being led by a foreign king? That might be a bit terrible. He's evil and rude and mean. He's a weirdo. Okay, yeah, he chops people's heads off. That's true. That's kind of a kingly thing to do. He's a punk. Yeah. Whoa. I keep up with all the messages. He came and took over England. Yes. He's bad. He killed. Oh yes, he killed people. Oh, so many. Oh, there you go. All right. So, yeah, he's a pretty mean. He's definitely mean. This is true. So the people aren't massively happy that William's there. They're a little bit disgruntled by the whole thing. It's one thing being taken over by an English king. It's another by a foreign king. Now, to be honest, it's a little bit deceptive. Yeah, I'm saying that the Normans came and they took over England, but we have to remember, or at least maybe I need to tell you, that Edward the Confessor the king who had died, the Anglo Saxon king, probably spoke more French than he spoke English. Yeah. Uh, a lot of the Vikings, they would have spoken a bit of French too. Harald Godwinson was probably quite fluent in French because a lot of people spoke French back then, even before William comes and invades from France. A lot of people have French blood. Edward the Confessor's mother, Emma of Normandy, came from, guess where? Normandy, which means that Edward the Confessor's mum was French. His he would have grown up speaking French and living in a very French kind of culture, I guess. So it wouldn't have been so much of a shock when William came over with his French ways and his mannerisms and stuff. But yes, people are not happy, mainly because he's super violent and he's just killed their king. So what we'll do, we will leave William there for a minute. I know there are still some bits. We need to talk about his castles. We need to talk about how he's hated by the North. We need to talk about the Doomsday Book and his literally explosive exits. So what we'll do is we'll save the rest of William for next week's history lesson, when we'll see what he does to take over England and how he eventually explodes, which is always a fun story. But just to let you know before we finish, as we go through, it would be great if you could build up some work based on these kings. If you can give me a page for each king, maybe try and get a picture of their face in there and some facts about them, maybe your opinions about them. I'd like to hear what you think of these kings and queens. You could even give each king and queen a star rating, maybe a mark out of 10, on how good a king or queen you think they are. So some of the kings or queens are going to be really cool. Yeah, Elizabeth I, she's amazing. I like her. William I, not so great. You might think, though, that he's a very cool king. So, oh, brilliant, Lucy. That's excellent to hear. You've already done a page. So what you can do, I'm making a timeline. That's a good idea as well. Yeah, so you could put these kings with their dates and queens, and make a nice timeline of the kings and queens. That's a cool idea too. Of course, you can write it up on your computer. Yeah, I don't mind how you do it. I don't mind if you don't do it at all, to be honest. I won't have time to go through and send you all comments about all of them. But if you would like to send them to my email address, which is here on the screen here, then I can have a look, and maybe I can put up some of the some nice ones for next time. Maybe I'll pick a few at random and put them up on the screen so people can, if you don't mind me sharing your work, then I could put some up and show everyone what's going on, and then we can share what we're doing, which would be fun. So yeah, maybe a picture, some information, and a score out of 10 for each of these kings and queens to see, whether you think they're good or bad, whether you like them or not. That'd be really cool. And so I hopefully will see a lot of you tomorrow for some geography. When we're going to do a similar thing, but instead of kings and queens, we're going to look at different countries from around the world. And we'll try and build up a bit of a portfolio of that as well. So it was lovely to see you all. Hopefully I'll get to know those of you that I haven't got to know already over the next few weeks. So have a great time. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.